Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about the infratemporal region, which houses the infratemporal fossa on the base of the skull. So this infratemporal fossa, this is the region on the skull, like I explained earlier. It's an irregular space at the lateral aspect of the skull, and its name suggests it's situated just inferior to the temporal fossa and to the deep ramus of the mandible. So this temporal and infratemporal fossa communicates with each other through the opening deep to the zygomatic arc. So you're actually going to see this on the diagram in these slides. So now let's look at the boundaries, the contents, then we'll look at the diagram that's going to show us the infratemporal fossa as well as how it communicates with the temporal region on the zygomatic arc. So starting with the anterior border. So the anterior border of the infratemporal region has the maxilla. It has the maxilla. The anterior border has the maxilla, which is the first one there. So we see on the superior border, it has the greater wing of the sphenoid. The superior border has the greater wing of the sphenoid, and the medial border has the lateral pterygoid plate, and the lateral border has the coronoid process and the ramus of the mandible. So let's look at the posterior border as well as the inferior border on our next slide. So this is exactly what we see on the inferior border. It's continuous with the neck, and the posterior border has the temporal mandibular joint and the styloid process. And we see that the infratemporal fossa communicates with the orbit via the inferior orbital fissure, and it also communicates with the pterygopalatine fossa via the pterygomaxillary fissure. So we're also going to see this properly on the illustrated diagram on the towards the end of our slides. So let's now look at the contents of the infratemporal fossa. So the contents there, we have the mandibular nerve. I will talk more properly on the mandibular nerve as well as the maxillary artery. But towards the end of the slides, we're going to explain a bit on the maxillary artery, looking at its parts. So it also has the medial and the lateral pterygoid muscle. So this medial and lateral pterygoid muscle, these are part of the muscles of mastication. And it also has the lower part of the temporalis muscle, which is also a muscle of mastication. And the infratemporal fossa also has the cauda tympani nerve as well as the otic ganglion. So we see all these are the contents of the infratemporal fossa. So we can see from the diagram here, this region here is the infratemporal fossa. This is the infratemporal fossa. So as we have talked about the anterior border, the inferior border, the posterior border, the superior border, the lateral border, as well as the medial border. So these are the ones that we can see around this the infratemporal fossa that's here. And we also said that this infratemporal fossa also communicates with the temporal region via the zygomatic arc. So this is the zygomatic arc over here. This is the zygomatic arch just over here above the infratemporal fossa. Let's check the next slide. So on the next slide, we're going to briefly talk about the maxillary artery. So the maxillary artery, we have already explained earlier that it's a part of the contents of the infratemporal fossa. So it's the terminal branch of the external carotid artery. So you can say that it's a branch of the external carotid artery, the terminal branch actually. So you can say it arises from the external carotid artery. Yeah. So we see that this maxillary artery is divided into three parts by the lateral pterygoid muscle. And as stated earlier, we said that the lateral pterygoid muscle is one of the muscles of mastication. So this lateral pterygoid muscle is the one which divides the maxillary artery into three parts. And this artery may pass superficial or deep to this lateral pterygoid muscle. So we're going to see this lateral pterygoid muscle towards the end of the slide, which has a well illustrated diagram. So as we have said that the maxillary artery is divided into three parts by the lateral pterygoid muscle. So the first part there, its origin to the lower margin inferior to the lateral pterygoid muscle. So this one is it originates from the inferior part to the lateral pterygoid muscle, while the second part originates superficial or deep to the inferior lateral pterygoid muscle. And lastly, the third part of the maxillary artery, this one lies within the pterygopalatine fossa. This is where the last part lies. So we can see this diagram here. It's just showing us the maxillary artery from the external carotid artery here. Like we have said that the maxillary artery is the terminal branch of the external carotid artery. So here we can see this is the maxillary artery, and don't forget that we have said that it's divided into three parts by the lateral pterygoid muscle, which is situated over here. As you can see, there's a deeper part here, there's a superficial part, so it comes all the way from here and it goes inside there. So we see that this is the first part over here, we have the second part and the third part inside. So this is the maxillary artery and its parts. Okay, so the next video we're going to talk more about the maxillary artery, but then this one is just showing us it's a well illustrated diagram of the lateral pterygoid muscle, which is over here. We can see this big muscle over here. So this is the lateral pterygoid muscle, which divides the maxilla into three regions, as we have seen from the previous diagram. As we have seen from here, that there's a first part, second part, and the third part. Okay, well, we can also see the lateral pterygoid muscle just here. Yes, so we see that it's deep to the medial pterygoid muscle. This is the medial pterygoid muscle, which is also a muscle of mastication, but the lateral pterygoid muscle is deep to the medial pterygoid muscle. So this is the end of the slide. Next time we're going to talk more about the maxillary artery. We're going to talk about its branches, yes, and as well as what its branches supply, what parts it supplies, and what innervates the different branches of the maxillary artery. So thank you. This is the end of the slide. Next time we're going to continue talking more about the maxillary artery.